The latest decadence between Israel and Hamas is raising the tension in the region. Both sides are looking at things from a different angle. Israel has launched intense airstrikes against the Gaza Strip following a surprise attack by Hamas militants over the weekend. This retaliation is aimed at a major blow by using Israel's right to legitimate defense. However, these attacks have also increased civilian casualties and prevented the entry of food, fuel, and basic supplies as part of a blockade policy that has placed Gaza in greater isolation. Both sides are suffering casualties. Tragic incidents in which civilians have lost their lives have increased. This situation reflects the urgent need for the parties to end the conflict and take steps towards peace. However, Hamas's commitment to escalate the conflict and strike targets without warning is making the conflict even more complicated. This in turn is causing a humanitarian crisis and calls for the intervention of the international community. Dialogue should be resumed between the parties in order to stop the deconfliction and achieve peace in the region. The protection of the civilian population and the provision of humanitarian assistance are also among the steps that should be taken immediately. We hope that the parties will work decisively to end the conflict and establish a lasting peace. The end of these tragic events will be a vital step for the security and stability of both communities. Israel took decisive action after the Hamas attack. The Israeli army has launched Operation Iron Sword against Gaza by crossing the border with Gaza with ground troops. This operation was supported by the Israeli Air Force, and a large number of Hamas targets were destroyed. However, the turning point of the operation took place at Kibbutz Karmia. The Israeli army forced the militants to surrender after an intense clash with Hamas militants in this area, located in the north of Gaza. This operation seems to be one of the most effective blows against Hamas militants. According to Israeli army officials, about 250 Hamas militants surrendered to Israeli troops in the area. These surrendered militants were brought to the Israeli army headquarters in Ashkelon and interrogated there. In addition, according to estimates, about 100 Hamas militants were also neutralized. This operation shows that Israel is acting in a deterrent and decisive manner. Israel is taking a resolute stance against the actions of Hamas in order to protect the security of its people. Israel states that the number of Hamas militants cannot be clearly determined, but it is claimed that about 500 Hamas militants have been neutralized and at least 400 militants have been captured alive since the third day of Operation Iron Sword. Israel continues to search for civilians killed in a violent Hamas attack on towns in southern Israel over the weekend. However, the tragic incident in the small farming community in Bori caused rescuers to be unable to launch search and rescue efforts due to being detained by armed men. The Israeli military notes that Hamas has largely taken control of the southern regions as a result of an unexpected offensive by its military and intelligence apparatus, leading to violent clashes in the streets for the first time in decades. In addition, Hamas claims that it is holding more than 130 soldiers and civilians kidnapped from Israel. The Israeli army has not yet made a statement on this issue, but army officials acknowledge that the number of casualties is increasing. This deconfliction is causing great human losses between both sides and once again emphasizes the necessity of establishing peace. We hope that the parties will make efforts to end this conflict and ensure a lasting peace in the region. Israel has taken strict security measures by deploying its tanks and unmanned aerial vehicles to the Gaza border in order to prevent new attacks. Thousands of Israelis have been evacuated from dozens of towns close to Gaza. In addition, the Israeli army launched a major mobilization, quickly calling up 300,000 reserve soldiers. These moves indicate that Israel is launching a larger offensive against Hamas and signal the beginning of broader operations against Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip. In a public speech, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "We have just started hitting Hamas. What we will do to our enemies in the coming days will reverberate for generations," he said. With today's operations, we are seeing that Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements are beginning to become reality. Israel is acting decisively with the aim of ensuring its own security and stopping Hamas's attacks. However, it is a fact that this conflict has increased civilian casualties and led to a humanitarian crisis. It is of great importance to start a deconstructive dialogue between the parties in order to establish peace. We hope that this difficult process will pave the way for peace. We hope that this difficult process will pave the way for peace for both sides. The attacks carried out by Hamas have legitimized not only the right of self-defense to Israel, but also all its operations. As the Israeli military October brought additional forces to areas near the border, the biggest question was whether a ground offensive would be launched into Gaza. The last Israeli ground offensive took place in 2014, and this operation caused a huge international reaction at that time. So, Israel had to cut the operation short. Abu Ubaida, a spokesman for the armed wing of Hamas, said in response to the Israeli airstrikes that when Israel targets civilians in homes in Gaza, the group will kill an Israeli civilian prisoner without prior warning. This shows how dangerous and deadly the conflict is, and there is concern about the increase in civilian casualties. The deconfliction between Israel and Hamas often has its origins in tensions around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. However, since the latest attack by Hamas took place on the Israeli People's Coastal Day, the Israeli reaction was extremely harsh. This latest attack has caused a loss of life not seen since the 1973 war with Egypt and Syria, fueling calls for Hamas to stay afloat at all costs rather than stay under pressure in Gaza. Hamas expresses that they are ready for a long war to end the Israeli occupation, which they say is unbearable now. Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen made it clear that war crimes will not be forgiven, warning that Hamas should not harm the hostages. The Israeli government has appointed an experienced military commander to manage the hostage and missing persons crisis. The origin of the deconflictions between Israel and Hamas is usually based on the tensions around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. However, since the latest Hamas attack took place on the Israeli People's Coastal Day, the Israeli response has also been extremely violent. This latest attack has caused a loss of life not seen since the 1973 war with Egypt and Syria, fueling calls for Hamas to stay afloat at all costs rather than stay under pressure in Gaza. Hamas expresses that they are ready for a long war to end the Israeli occupation, which they say is unbearable now. Israel was forced to exercise its right to self-defense after the latest attack by Hamas and stepped up its operations against Gaza. Thousands of Israelis have been evacuated in a number of towns near Gaza, and the Israeli army has launched a major mobilization, calling up 300,000 reserve soldiers. In a public speech, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that they have just started hitting Hamas and that their actions against their enemies in the coming days will be remembered for generations. With these operations, it is clearly seen that Israel is giving a harsh response to Gaza. The desperation among Palestinians is growing every day. Many of them see no hope in the decrepit Israeli-controlled territories. The increasing attacks by settlers in the West Bank, the constant blockade of Gaza, and apathy around the world are further increasing this desperation. Last night, rockets fired from Gaza hit 2 neighborhoods in Jerusalem, and the sounds of explosions echoed in the city. During the ongoing attacks by Hamas, civilians fled to shelters. But immediately after, Israeli warplanes carried out an intense bombardment of the residential and commercial area, known as Ramal in central Gaza. A building housing the headquarters of the Palestinian Telecommunications Company was destroyed after residents were warned to evacuate the area, where there were constant explosions. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has ordered a complete siege of Gaza, ordering the authorities to cut off electricity, block the entry of food and fuel. This will make the civilian population inside Gaza dependent on Rafah to cross into Egypt, and people will face a difficult situation. It is of great importance that all parties prefer diplomatic ways and negotiations in order to end this conflict and achieve peace in the region. Increasing the suffering of civilians further cannot be a solution for any side.